All right, so are you ready to dive in? Because today we're looking at some stuff about Russia and global tensions.
Yeah, things are heating up.
Yeah, for sure. And it all starts with this YouTube video claiming Russia has this plot to target Western airlines.
Right.
But we're going to go way beyond just that video and see what's really going on. We've got analysis documents, news from places like express.co.uk, AP News, and Yahoo News.
Okay.
And even a press release from IATA, the International Air Transport Association, about a plane crash. So yeah, strap in.
Buckle up.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride.
It's going to be a bumpy one. This is a situation with a lot of moving pieces. It's pretty complex.
For sure.
Why don't we start with that YouTube video and the whole claim about Polish intelligence uncovering this plot by Russia targeting Western airlines?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big accusation, right? Like, that's huge.
Gotcha.
And I gotta say, I haven't seen anything from, the major news outlets like Reuters or BBC to back that up.
And that's the first red flag, right? When something this big is being claimed, you'd expect to see it everywhere, especially with official statements from governments and stuff. The fact that we haven't seen that really makes you think twice about whether it's true or not.
Especially when you think about where it's coming from. YouTube videos. I mean, they can be totally fake, edited, manipulated, or just plain wrong.
For sure.
So how do we even approach this without, falling down some crazy rabbit hole of misinformation?
Well, you have to remember that information is a weapon, especially during conflicts. Governments, organizations, even just regular people, try to spread information that's good for their side, whether it's totally true or not.
Yeah.
So we got to look at everything really carefully.
Yeah.
Especially with stuff like this.
Okay, so that YouTube video, we can't just take it at face value.
Right.
But there are other claims about rising tensions, too, like increased NATO activity. It mentions France is training special forces maybe to send to Ukraine, and Lithuania is ready to send troops if Zelensky asks them to. I mean, that's not exactly calming, is it?
Well, it does fit with what we know about what's going on in Ukraine and all the tension between Russia and NATO. But again, we got to look for confirmation from official sources and think about whether things are being exaggerated or twisted.
Okay, and then there's this explosion at a Lukoil oil refinery in Volgograd in Russia. The video is saying it could be sabotage, but they don't really know the cause for sure yet.
Right. It just shows how easy it is to make something fit a certain story, even if there's no proof. It might be part of the bigger picture of tensions, but that doesn't necessarily mean the video is right.
Gotcha.
It might not even be the most likely explanation.
So basically, we've got this YouTube video making all these dramatic claims. Some of them seem to fit with what's going on politically, but nothing's been officially confirmed.
Yeah.
So what do these news articles say? Do they tell us anything new?
Well, they give us more direct statements from officials, which helps us go beyond just guessing. For example, express.co.uk has a quote from Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk, where he directly accuses Russia of acts of air terror.
Wow, okay, that's pretty strong. But that doesn't necessarily prove anything about this airline plot, does it?
No, but it shows that a really important NATO member is seriously concerned and doesn't trust Russia.
For sure.
Both express.co.uk and AP News talk about Tusk's accusation and mention that Western officials think Russia might be trying to put explosives on cargo planes going to the U.S. They even talk about these incidents in Germany and the U.K. where packages with suspected devices caught fire.
Wait, hold on. So there's actually evidence of them trying to do this? That changes things a lot.
It definitely raises the stakes.
Yeah.
But the articles don't give us all the details about the evidence of the investigations. We still have to rely on what they're telling us.
Right.
And we still need to think critically about how they're presenting the information.
Right, because even the good news sources can get things wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially when news is breaking and everything's happening so fast. That's why it's so important to look at a bunch of different sources.
Okay.
And to think about what their biases might be.
So we're starting to see a pattern here. This YouTube video is making these big claims, and while those haven't been officially confirmed, the news reports are showing us these other things that are happening that could be connected to Russia.
Right, and that's where thinking critically is super important. We can't jump to conclusions just because of what we saw in that video.
Yeah.
We need to look at the bigger picture that the news is giving us and then decide what seems real, what needs more investigation, and what information we're still missing.
It's like we're detectives putting together a case.
Yeah.
Except the stakes are way higher. It's not just about some stolen jewels. This is global security.
Exactly. We have to weigh the evidence and think about other explanations, just like a good detective would do.
Okay, so the articles also talk about what some intelligence experts are saying. Ken McCallum, the head of MI5's Domestic Intelligence Service, he warned that the GRU, Russia's military intelligence, is on a, quote, sustained mission to generate mayhem on British and European streets. And he specifically mentioned arson and sabotage as tactics they're using.
And just so everyone listening knows, GRU is basically Russia's main military intelligence agency. They're known for doing all sorts of secret stuff and have been linked to espionage and causing trouble all over the world.
Wow.
So when McCallum says something like that, it's pretty serious.
Yeah.
Given their history.
Yeah. Okay, so even if we ignore that whole unverified airline plot, there's still good reason to be worried about Russia causing chaos in the West.
Yeah, and another expert, Keir Giles, who's a senior fellow at Chatham House, he has another layer to this.
Okay.
He thinks that some of the attacks, even the ones that seem random, are part of a pattern of Russia probing defenses and probing the capabilities of European states to respond.
Wait, what does that even mean? Like they're just testing things out to see how far they can go.
You got it. Think of it as their way to see how quickly and effectively NATO forces will react, where the weak spots are in security systems, and how willing different countries are to fight back when they're provoked.
So it's not just about causing chaos. They're actually gathering information and seeing what they can get away with.
Exactly. And that makes it even scarier, because it means they're doing this on purpose. It's not just a bunch of random events.
Yeah.
It's a strategy.
And Giles also said something that's really disturbing. He thinks that Russia is totally fine with a lot of civilians getting hurt to get what they want. That's a whole other level of messed up.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about, and it shows how serious things could get if things keep escalating.
Okay, so that brings us to IATA and their press release about the crash of Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243. They're calling for a thorough and transparent investigation.
Right.
Which makes sense. This crash adds a whole other layer of complexity to this already complicated situation.
Absolutely. Both Russia and Azerbaijan confirmed that the crash happened in Russian airspace right near where there were military operations.
Which makes you wonder if the plane got caught in the middle of all that, whether it was on purpose or an accident.
It's a real possibility that we can't ignore Willie Walsh, the Director General of IATA. He said civil aircraft must never be the intended or accidental target of military operations. It's a really important reminder that these conflicts can have huge human costs.
Yeah, absolutely. So where do we even go from here? We have this unverified claim about a plot against airlines. We have evidence of possible sabotage attempts, increased NATO activity, and a plane crash that could be connected to everything. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it is.
So much.
And that's exactly why we have to step back and think critically.
Right.
We need to look at where the information's coming from, the possibility of misinformation, and what's happening in the world politically. We can't just believe everything we see and hear.
Especially when it comes to something as serious as international conflict.
Exactly. There's so much at stake here. It's our responsibility to stay informed and have thoughtful discussions about these complicated issues.
Yeah, I agree.
They're not easy to talk about.
Not at all.
But they're important.
So we've got all these pieces of the puzzle, but like how do we put them all together without letting our own biases or fears kind of mess up our judgment?
That's the question, isn't it? It's easy to get caught up in all the emotion, especially when things are being presented in a way that plays on our fears.
Yeah, like that first YouTube video we talked about. It definitely played on that fear of a big terrorist attack, which makes sense given everything that's going on.
Exactly. And fear can be a really powerful tool, for manipulating people. It can make us less critical of information, and we're more likely to just believe things without questioning them, especially if it kind of fits with what we already think or worry about.
So how do we avoid that? How do we make sure we're not just blindly believing what we're told, even if it's coming from a source we usually trust?
We have to actually engage with the information, not just passively consume it. Ask tough questions, like who benefits from this information being out there? What evidence is there to back it up? Are there other possible explanations that we're not thinking about?
And you mentioned earlier that even good news sources can get things wrong. How do we know which sources to trust, especially when things are moving so quickly?
That's where media literacy comes in. We need to be aware of the biases of different news outlets, their track record. Have they been accurate in the past? And where do they get their information from? Are they relying on anonymous sources or official statements or eyewitness accounts? All those things can affect how we interpret the information we're being given.
So it's not just about what they're saying, but also who's saying it and how they're saying it.
Exactly. And it's also about understanding that any single source might not be telling the whole story. It's always better to look at several different sources to get a more complete picture.
Right, like that telephone game where the message changes every time someone repeats it.
Exactly. If
Yeah.
we only listen to one person, we might miss some really important details.
Okay, and what about social media? That's where a lot of people get their news now, but it's also like a breeding ground for misinformation.
Oh, absolutely. Things can spread so fast on social media, whether they're true or not. It's like a wildfire of information. And it can be hard to tell what's real and what's not.
Yeah, and the algorithms can make things even worse by showing us only the stuff that confirms what we already think.
Exactly. We can get trapped in these echo chambers where we're only seeing one side of the story.
So basically, we need to be super careful about what we see on social media. We don't have to ignore it completely. We have to be extra critical and look for confirmation from other sources.
Right. If something sounds too good to be true or too crazy to believe, it probably is.
Okay, so let's try to apply all of this. We've got the unverified airline plot, the increased NATO activity, the sabotage attempts that we saw in the news, and the tragic plane crash. What do you think seems most credible? What should we be paying the most attention to?
Well, I think the evidence of NATO countries increasing their military activity and the reports of those possible sabotage attempts, especially the ones involving cargo planes, those are definitely worth paying attention to. Those things seem to fit with the overall situation, and they've been reported by multiple sources that are usually pretty reliable.
Yeah, those details seem a lot more believable than that initial claim about the airline plot, which
Yeah.
still feels iffy without any official confirmation. It's not that it couldn't be true, but we need more evidence to just take it at face value.
Exactly. And while it makes sense that Western security officials are on high alert because of those sabotage attempts, we can't let fear be the only thing that shapes how we see the situation. We need to stay informed, be critical of what we're reading and watching, and remember that things are always changing.
It's like walking a tightrope. We have to be aware of the dangers, but we can't let it make us paranoid.
That's a good way to put it. We need to find that balance between being cautious and being level-headed, and remember that this is a really complicated situation with a lot of unknowns.
And the things we do and say can have real consequences.
Exactly. This isn't just some theoretical discussion. Real people's lives are at stake.
Which brings us back to the IATA and their focus on that plane crash. They seem especially concerned about making sure planes are safe, even in the middle of all this conflict.
Yes, and their statement reminds us that countries need to work together and follow international law even when things are really tense. They specifically mentioned the Geneva Conventions and the Chicago Convention, which set the rules for how wars are fought and how civilians are protected.
Because even in a war, there are rules, and attacking civilian planes is a huge violation of those rules.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that the effects of war go way beyond the battlefield. It can disrupt trade, displace people, and create humanitarian crises that affect everyone.
So it's not just about picking sides or trying to figure out who's right or wrong. It's about understanding how complicated these situations are, the possibility of unintended consequences, and the need to prioritize peace and protecting civilians.
I couldn't agree more.
So we've talked a lot about critical thinking, media literacy, and being careful about misinformation. But how do we actually do this in our daily lives? How do we become better informed and more engaged citizens in a world that's so complicated?
I think it starts with recognizing that we all have a responsibility to stay informed and to talk about these issues in a thoughtful way.
But how do we even start to sort through all the information that's constantly coming at us? It can feel super overwhelming, especially when things are changing so fast.
It's about being picky with our sources. Instead of just relying on social media or flashy headlines, we need to get our information from reputable news organizations, experts, and official statements.
And not just reading or watching passively, but really thinking about what we're taking in.
Exactly. We should be questioning what we read, considering different perspectives, and being willing to change our minds when we learn new information.
So it's an ongoing process of learning, questioning, and reevaluating. It's not about having all the answers, but being open to new information and being willing to admit when we're wrong.
Exactly. It's about being humble, realizing that none of us have all the answers, and being open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
It sounds like a whole new way of thinking about information, especially with how much is out there these days. It's not just about being informed, it's about being, picky, critical.
Exactly. We can't just let the information come at us. We have to be involved in, shaping how we understand things.
Okay, so as we finish up our deep dive into all of this, what's the one big thing you want to leave our listeners with? What should they be thinking about as they deal with all these different claims and potential misinformation out there?
I think the most important thing is to remember that you're not helpless. When it comes to this information warfare stuff, You have the power to think critically, evaluate sources, and come to your own conclusions.
Yeah,
It's not always easy,
definitely not.
and it takes effort.
Yeah.
But it's so important for being a good citizen in today's world.
It's like we have to take responsibility for how we understand the world around us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with that responsibility comes being careful, being skeptical, and being willing to challenge what we think we know.
And remembering that there's often more to the story than what we see at first glance.
Right. It's about digging deeper, looking for context, and considering different points of view. It's about being curious and not just accepting the easiest explanation.
It's easy to get overwhelmed and feel like what we do doesn't really matter, especially when we're talking about something as big as international conflict. But you're saying that how we approach information, our willingness to be critical and involved, can actually make a difference.
I really believe that it can. Informed citizens are essential for a democracy to work and for a peaceful world. The choices we make about what we read and watch, what we believe, and how we talk about these things can have a real impact.
Yeah.
It starts with each of us taking responsibility for what we understand about the world.
That's a powerful thought. It's not about knowing everything. It's about being part of the solution. It's about understanding that we all have a role to play in making the world a better place. More informed, more peaceful.
You said it perfectly. And remember, this conversation doesn't end here. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep engaging with the world around you.
I love that. That's great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And to everyone listening, if you want to learn more about anything we talked about, check out the links we have in the show notes. And as always, we'd love to hear what you think. Come join the conversation on our social media. Let's keep talking about this stuff. Until next time, stay curious.